Before Shedeur Sanders even took a snap in the NFL, he was already fighting battles off the field. Rex Ryan lit the match by questioning his work ethic and attitude, but it was Cam Newton who stepped into the fire. Newton knew this playbook all too well: strong, confident, black quarterbacks being written off not for their stats, but for their swagger. He didn't just argue, he relived his own journey. From misunderstood prospect to MVP, Newton brought receipts and he brought fury.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
The confrontation wasn't just heated, it was revealing. Newton's defense of Sanders wasn't about hype, it was about history. It pulled the curtain back on how easily black athletes are boxed in by media narratives, and how damaging those narratives can be. The clash with Ryan became a moment of clarity, the need to evaluate players by what they do, not how they're perceived. Because in this league, perception too often writes the rules, and Newton wasn't about to let it slide this time. It all started with a comment, one sentence from Rex Ryan that reignited an old and familiar fire. During a segment that was supposed to be just another roundtable discussion on young quarterbacks, Rex decided to take it somewhere else entirely. He accused Shedeur Sanders of having poor body language, of not looking dedicated enough, of not seeming like someone locked in for NFL success. No breakdown of his performance. No critique of tape. Just a series of vague, unfounded jabs about his demeanor, like that alone could define his future. Cam Newton was on set. And he didn't let it slide. Because for Cam, this wasn't just a bad take, it was a loaded one. The kind that he's heard before. The kind that young black quarterbacks always hear. And he wasn't about to sit there and let it happen again. Not to someone who hasn't even had the chance to start a single NFL game. Cam's response wasn't calm and it wasn't rehearsed. It was raw. It was direct. And yes, it nearly got physical. Because this wasn't just about football. This was about the media's power to shape a narrative with absolutely no receipts, and how that power has historically been used against athletes who dare to be confident, composed, and unapologetically black. Cam called it out for what it was: baseless, racially coded criticism. Shedeur Sanders is not lazy. He's not disinterested. He's not lacking focus. What he is, according to coaches, teammates, and people who've actually watched him, is prepared, poised, and locked in. He's known for staying cool under pressure, reading defenses well, and carrying himself with a quiet confidence that doesn't require showboating or yelling on the sidelines. But when that confidence comes in the form of a young black quarterback, it's suddenly reframed as a problem. That's the hypocrisy Cam was responding to. He's seen it play out before. Over and over. He lived it when he was in the league, when his MVP season wasn't enough to stop the critiques about his celebrations, his wardrobe, his smile. He watched it happen to Lamar Jackson, whose intelligence was questioned before he was drafted. To Justin Fields, who was labeled the last one in, first one out, with zero evidence. And now it's happening to Shedeur. The same script. The same tone. The same lazy assumptions wrapped in expert opinion. And it's not harmless. Because once a narrative like that hits the airwaves, it spreads. It becomes a concern. It makes its way into scouting reports. It's repeated by anonymous team executives. It becomes part of a player's reputation. One that they have to fight off for the rest of their careers, no matter how well they perform. That's why Cam reacted the way he did. He wasn't just defending Shedeur Sanders. He was defending the right of black quarterbacks to be judged by their game, not their vibe. The argument on set got heated. Cam challenged Rex directly, demanding to know where he was getting this so-called intel. Rex reportedly couldn't back it up. Because there was nothing. It wasn't about film. It wasn't about sources. It was about a feeling. A feeling based on how Sanders looks on the field, not how he plays. And that's the exact problem. There is a pattern in sports media where black athletes are judged on attitude before aptitude. Swagger becomes a red flag. Quiet confidence becomes disinterest. If they're calm, they don't care enough. If they're passionate, they're emotional. It's a trap, and Cam Newton wasn't about to let Rex Ryan pull Shedeur into it. Cam laid out exactly what makes Sanders elite, not just physically but mentally. His ability to process the game. To lead without theatrics. To stay centered even when the pressure is on. These are strengths. But too often, the media treats them like warning signs when they come from a player who doesn't match the traditional mold of an NFL leader. And that mold? It's outdated. It's based on a narrow idea of what leadership looks like. It's built around comfort, familiarity, and most importantly, It's been weaponized to keep black quarterbacks from being evaluated fairly. Rex Ryan's comments weren't just off base, they were an example of exactly why so many talented players like Shedeur struggle to get a fair shot. The concern isn't ability, it's perception. And that perception is being shaped by voices like Rex who can go on national platforms, speak without facts, and influence how teams and fans view a player before they've even taken the field. Cam Newton understood that, and he used his voice to push back. Not politely, not softly, but forcefully. Because that's what the moment called for. The fallout was immediate. Clips of the confrontation spread fast. Some people praised Cam for standing up to the nonsense. Others predictably accused him of being too emotional or making it about race. But the truth is, it was about race. Because this kind of criticism doesn't come out of nowhere. It's rooted in years of double standards that still haven't been addressed. And let's be clear, Cam Newton wasn't just angry. He was tired. Tired of seeing the same pattern repeat. Tired of watching confident, qualified, talented black quarterbacks get buried under media narratives that have nothing to do with their game. He knows how damaging those narratives are. They keep players from getting drafted where they should. They delay opportunities. They make coaches second-guess what they already know. And for quarterbacks, where trust and leadership are everything, those narratives can end careers before they even begin. So when Cam saw it happening again, he didn't hesitate. He stepped in and he said enough. That's what this was really about. Not just defending one player, but protecting a space where players like Shedeur can thrive without having to constantly fight against perception. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need pity. He doesn't need saving. What he needs is a fair shot, judged by the same standards as everyone else. Based on what he does, not how he carries himself. Based on his performance, not someone's projection. And Cam Newton made sure that message was loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. Now the question becomes, who else is going to step up? Because this isn't just about Cam. And it's not just about Rex. This is about the people who shape the way athletes are viewed. The ones with platforms, influence, and microphones. Are they willing to check their own biases? Are they willing to speak up when a narrative is off? Or are they going to keep letting the same coded criticisms go unchecked? Because whether the league wants to admit it or not, how young black quarterbacks are talked about matters. Those narratives have power. And that power needs to be used responsibly. Shedeur Sanders has earned respect. He's shown he's mentally tough, disciplined, and ready for the big stage. The only thing standing in his way now is a system that needs to evolve. Cam Newton did his part. Now it's up to the rest of the football world to follow suit. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Cam said what needed to be said? Was Rex out of line? Are you seeing the same patterns repeat? Let's talk about it. Like this video if you're tired of hearing the same tired takes with no receipts. Share it with someone who still doesn't get why body language isn't a stat. And hit that subscribe button if you're here for real conversations that go deeper than surface-level analysis. Because the NFL is changing. And Shedeur Sanders? He's not asking for permission. He's earning his place. One fact at a time. And if it wasn't already obvious, let's drive this all the way home. The real issue here isn't whether Shedeur Sanders smiled enough during warm-ups or looked intense enough on the sideline. The issue is who's allowed to be seen as a leader, who gets the benefit of the doubt, and who gets buried in speculation. When Rex Ryan opened his mouth and launched into Shedeur, what he exposed wasn't Sanders' supposed flaws, it was his own. Flaws in judgment. Flaws in awareness. Flaws in understanding how damaging his words could be. Because he wasn't just speaking as a former coach or as a media figure. He was speaking as someone with institutional authority, the kind of voice that can sway front offices, sports networks, fan bases, and coaching decisions with nothing more than a vibe. And Cam Newton? He wasn't going to let that fly. He knew where this road leads. It starts with he doesn't look the part, turns into he might not be ready for the moment, and ends with we'll go with the safer option. And that safer option? 9 times out of 10 it's someone who fits the mold a little better. Someone who's been granted more time, more patience, more room to grow. Shedeur Sanders doesn't get that room. Not yet. He has to walk in and already be polished. Already be unshakable. Already be above reproach. And even then, someone like Rex Ryan will find a way to pick apart the tone in which he carries that professionalism. That's why Cam snapped. And let's stop tiptoeing around it. Racial bias in quarterback evaluation is not a theory. It's a pattern. It's historical. It's persistent. And it's still playing out right in front of us. Every time a black quarterback enters the league, the coverage changes. Suddenly, words like attitude, maturity, body language, and work ethic dominate the discussion. Not because those things don't matter, but because they're applied selectively. You don't hear those terms thrown at young white quarterbacks nearly as often. You hear about their upside, their intangibles, their coachability. When they struggle, it's growing pains. When they get loud on the sideline, it's leadership. When they throw picks, it's learning. Meanwhile, when Shedeur stays quiet and focused, it's a red flag. That contradiction isn't accidental. It's baked into the system. And unless someone calls it out in real time, it just keeps repeating. So when Cam Newton went off, when he leaned in, raised his voice, and challenged Rex Ryan face to face, it wasn't about drama. It was about disrupting the playbook. The one that always finds a way to undermine black quarterbacks before they even get started. And if you're still wondering why it almost got physical, that's why. Because for Cam, this wasn't just a bad take, it was a dangerous one. One that could linger in Shedeur's career the way similar comments lingered in his. Cam never got to be just a quarterback. He was always the athletic guy, the flashy one, the distraction, even when he was an MVP. And when he fell out of favor with the league, the stories weren't about his injuries or circumstances. They were about his attitude, his focus, his commitment. Same words, different decade. Shedeur Sanders is walking into the league with those exact words already waiting for him. So yes, Cam got heated. Because he's not watching it happen again. He's not going to let another young, talented, mentally elite quarterback be undermined by the same soft-spoken prejudice that derailed so many before him. The media has to take responsibility for what it amplifies. When someone like Rex Ryan makes a comment like that on air, it doesn't vanish when the commercial hits. It lingers. It enters the group chat. It becomes part of a young quarterback's narrative, one that gets repeated in team meetings, on sports radio, and across social media. And eventually it affects real decisions about who gets a shot, who gets benched, and who gets cut. Cam Newton saw that whole cycle loading up and decided to break it before it started. And honestly, that's what leadership actually looks like. Not just hyping up teammates on the field, but standing up for them when they're not in the room. Calling out injustice when it's subtle. Using your platform to disrupt bias in real time, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Because here's the reality. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need to prove that he loves the game. He already has. He's done the work. He's shown the discipline. And he's carried himself with a level of professionalism that should be earning him nothing but respect. But respect is conditional in this league, especially when you show up with swagger. And that swagger? That's not arrogance. That's resilience. That's knowing the game is already stacked against you and choosing to walk in any way like you belong. That's not entitlement, it's survival. Cam knows that. Shedeur knows that. And so do the millions of people who watched that clip and immediately understood what was going on. This was never just about a quarterback's facial expressions. It was about who gets the benefit of context, and who gets cast as the problem. And if you think Cam Newton was too emotional, ask yourself why standing up for fairness, demanding evidence, and pushing back against a recycled stereotype is seen as too much. But casually calling a young black player lazy without proof is just part of the discussion. That's the imbalance. That's the problem. And it's time more people had the guts to name it. Shedeur Sanders is doing what he's supposed to do. He's showing up, staying grounded, staying ready. But if people like Rex Ryan keep handing out these narratives with no accountability, it won't matter what Shedeur does, because someone's already planted the seed of doubt. Cam Newton just refused to let that happen quietly. And now the spotlight's on the people who've been hiding behind gut feelings and eye tests. Now the question isn't whether Shedeur's ready. The question is whether the system is ready to see him clearly, without the fog of inherited bias. He doesn't need to change anything. He needs to be evaluated fairly. And if that feels uncomfortable for some people, good. Growth usually is. So where does this leave us? Cam Newton stood his ground. Rex Ryan dug his heels in. Shedeur Sanders was thrust into a conversation he didn't ask for, but one that's been chasing quarterbacks who look like him for decades. And the rest of us? We're left staring at a system that's once again shown its cracks, and acting like those cracks aren't threatening to swallow up another promising career. This is why Cam Newton's reaction wasn't just justified, it was necessary. Because let's be honest, if someone with Cam's profile, history, and first-hand experience didn't step up, who would have? It sure wasn't going to be the rest of the panel. No one else in the room called out Rex Ryan's comments for what they were: vague, biased, and wildly irresponsible. No one pushed back and said, "Hold on, what are you basing that on?" Instead, the conversation rolled on like it always does when comments like this get tossed into the air. soft, passive, and complicit. And that silence? It's louder than anything Cam said. Because when the only person speaking up is the one who knows how this script ends, what does that say about everyone else in the room? In the industry? In the league? It says the system is still very comfortable with the way things are. Comfortable letting speculation carry more weight than statistics. Comfortable pretending that vibes are valid forms of player evaluation. Comfortable allowing coded language to shape public opinion, team decisions, and player reputations, without anyone being held accountable for the fallout. Shedeur Sanders hasn't been in the league long, but he's already dealing with the weight of those perceptions. And the most frustrating part? He hasn't done anything to deserve it. He hasn't been involved in scandals. He hasn't thrown teammates under the bus. He hasn't stormed off the field or refused to play. He's been professional, focused, ready. But that's the cruel reality of the situation. Being exceptional isn't enough when the expectations aren't based on performance, but on how well you conform to an image that was never designed for you in the first place. And let's be real, that image? It's rigid. It's outdated. And it's still being enforced by voices that haven't evolved with the game. Rex Ryan represents a generation of football minds that cling to feelings over facts, where grit and leadership are judged based on posture and tone rather than poise under pressure, where being loud is leadership for one player but arrogance for another, where maturity becomes a dog whistle for acts like we want him to. But the league has changed. The players have changed. And the expectations need to change too. Because if you're still evaluating quarterbacks with the same playbook you used in 1999, you're not analyzing, you're projecting. And that projection disproportionately harms black quarterbacks who refuse to dull their light just to fit in. Cam Newton, for all the criticism he's taken, has always played and spoken like someone who knew the weight of his presence. He's been vocal, expressive, confident. And at every step of his career he was punished for it. His personality was dissected more than his passing efficiency. His smile drew more coverage than his wins. And every time he stepped outside of the very narrow, silent suit-and-tie box the league built for quarterbacks, it cost him. So now, seeing Shedeur Sanders face that same fire before he's even had a chance to throw a regular-season NFL pass, Cam wasn't just speaking for Sanders. He was speaking for every quarterback who came before, and everyone who'll come after. And that's what makes this moment so pivotal. Because this wasn't a back and forth between two guys with hot takes. This was a collision between two mindsets. The one that wants to keep things exactly how they've always been, and the one demanding that we stop pretending not to see what's happening. And let's not overlook the fact that Cam almost getting physical wasn't just about ego. It was about the pressure of constantly having to defend your value, your legacy, and your place in a room that was never built for you. He reached a boiling point. Because this isn't about just this moment. It's about every moment like it. Every young black quarterback who's been told they're not ready, when what people really meant was, "You make me uncomfortable." Every guy who was described as a great athlete, but not quite a quarterback. Every leader who had to lead twice as well just to be called half as good. That's the context people like Rex Ryan ignore. That's the history Cam Newton is always carrying into these rooms. And when he raised his voice, when he stepped to Rex, when he made it crystal clear that these narratives were not just wrong but harmful, that was the moment someone finally said, "No, not again. Not this time." Shedeur Sanders deserves better. Not just because he's talented, but because he's earned the right to be judged like everyone else. To have his game speak louder than someone else's gut feeling. To enter the league without having to climb over a mountain of assumptions just to get to the starting line. He shouldn't have to answer for his confidence. That should be celebrated, not questioned. He shouldn't have to perform humility to be taken seriously. He already performed on the field. And he shouldn't have to wait for a chance that's been delayed not by skill or preparation, but by a narrative that someone decided to float because they didn't like the look on his face. That's what this whole thing comes down to. Not just who gets to play quarterback, but who gets to belong there. Who gets to be seen as a leader. Who gets the space to grow. And who gets that space taken away by one sentence, one clip, one feeling from someone who doesn't even realize how much damage they're doing. Cam Newton realized it. That's why he didn't hold back. Because when you've been on the receiving end of that machine, you know how ruthless it is. You know how fast it moves. You know how quickly it can derail someone's path. And when you see it revving up for someone who deserves better, you stop it, even if that means risking your own reputation to do it. Now it's on the rest of us to keep that energy going. To question the narratives. To demand receipts. To call out the double standards when they show up dressed as analysis. and to protect the players who shouldn't have to fight bias just to play the game they've already mastered. Shedeur Sanders is that player. He's walking into the NFL with the skill, the mindset, and the maturity that most teams claim to want. But unless people like Cam Newton speak up, the system will find a way to twist that into something it can't recognize and won't reward. That's what's at stake here. Not just one argument on a sports show, but the future of how young black quarterbacks are seen, respected, and remembered. And if you're still unsure about what the big deal is, why Cam went that hard, why the conversation turned tense, why it nearly came to blows, let's break it down one final time. This wasn't just Cam Newton defending a young quarterback. This was Cam standing in the middle of a cycle that has erased, diminished, and distorted the legacies of talented black quarterbacks and saying, not this one. Not on my watch. Because whether you like Cam or not, whether you agree with his past decisions or not, what you can't deny is that he's seen this happen in real time. And he's one of the few with the voice and the platform to call it out without blinking. What Rex Ryan did was reckless. It wasn't football commentary, it was character assassination wrapped in casual football lingo. He didn't critique Shedeur's reads or his pocket presence. He went straight for the he doesn't care argument, as if he could look at a calm, focused 21-year-old and divine his internal drive from a few sideline clips. And the most frustrating part? If no one like Cam was there, that's where the story would have ended. Shedeur Sanders, talented but questionable commitment. That little footnote would stick to him like glue, repeated across segments, folded into pre-game commentary, turned into concern from anonymous scouts. And suddenly Shedeur wouldn't just be battling defenses, he'd be battling a reputation that someone else built out of nothing. That's why Cam had to say something. And that's why he said it with fire. Because these narratives don't die on their own. They spread unless someone smashes the brakes. And if Cam has to risk looking too loud or too aggressive to do that, so be it. He's played that role before. And in a league that still pretends to be colorblind, while penalizing confidence and composure in young black athletes, someone has to take the hit. Cam took it. He caught the headlines. He caught the backlash. But he also caught the moment before it spiraled. And because of that, Shedeur Sanders can keep walking his path without having to constantly shake off an unearned stain. This moment won't be remembered for the argument. It'll be remembered for the line that was drawn. It said, if you're going to criticize, bring facts. If you're going to analyze, leave your bias at the door. And if you're going to question the heart of a player, especially one who's done nothing but show up and show out, you better come with more than a feeling. So to every player watching, every coach listening, every fan paying attention, this was about more than a quarterback. This was about fairness. And the fight to protect it no matter who you are. Like this if you're tired of watching narratives ruin talent. Share it if you're done with excuses for biased commentary. And hit subscribe if you want to keep cutting through the noise with real talk, real facts, and zero filters. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't start this fight, but he's going to finish it.